Hello and welcome. Let's get you caught up on today's key global developments. We'll start in Syria. There are some pretty serious allegations emerging.
Yes, allegations that Syrian security forces actually oversaw armed civilians who killed Alawites a couple of months back.
And this comes from someone accused of being involved.
That's right, a man named Abu Khalid. He claims government forces advised and monitored his group in Sanabar, told them only to shoot if insurgents shot first.
Okay, but there's a complication, isn't there? Video evidence.
Exactly. Abu Khalid filmed himself killing a 64-year-old Alawite resident, Mahmoud Yusuf Mohammed. He claimed Mohammed was an insurgent, but, well, the video apparently contradicts that.
And the military police.
They deny any coordination with Abu Khalid. Meanwhile, human rights groups are estimating nearly 900 civilians, mainly Alawites, were killed by pro-government forces in that coastal region back in early March.
It really highlights the ongoing sectarian issues, even with the change in government.
Definitely. The Alawites, they're an offshoot of Shia Islam, about 10% of Syria's population, which is majority Sunni. There have been, tensions historically.
And this coastal area, it saw this violence just after an attack on government forces.
Yes, a day after pro-Assad fighters attacked them. It seems the new Sunni Islamist-led government's call for support might have fueled sectarian anger against Alawite civilians.
So you had different groups involved in the targeting.
Witnesses say so, yeah. Various armed groups targeting Alawites. Though, interestingly, some accounts also mention government forces actually protecting Alawites in certain situations.
Sanabar itself sounds devastated.
Around 200 people killed. There are reports of a mass grave from hurried burials. The village is now mostly women, apparently.
And the man Abu Khalid killed, Mahmoud Yusuf Mohammed, his body lay there for days.
For 3 days, yes. His family was too scared to bury him. He was, by all accounts, a respected farmer and minibus driver. His house was near the highway where previous regime attacks happened.
Who were these armed groups responding to the government call?
A mix, it seems. Foreign jihadists, local civilians, and even some nominally part of the new army.
We heard about a survivor account, too.
Yes, a woman described masked gunmen in green uniforms killing her father and brother after stealing from them, insulting them, solely because they were Alawite.
And Abu Khalid's justification for killing Mahmoud, still insisting he was an insurgent.
He maintains that, yes, despite the video. He also spoke emotionally about losing his own brother in a 2018 bombing by Assad's forces and a cousin killed recently.
What are the overall numbers from rights groups?
The Syrian Network for Human Rights, SNHR, reports former regime loyalists killed at least 446 civilians and over 170 government forces on March 6th. And in retaliation, pro-government forces killed at least 889 civilians.
Amnesty International has weighed in as well.
They have called the attacks on Alawite civilians deliberate and unlawful. They even cited a video of a pro-government fighter chanting ethnic cleansing.
Just horrific details, survivors showing IDs.
Only to be called Alawite pigs. It really from insurgents for any chance of stability.
And this group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, they're forming the backbone of the new army.
That's right, a powerful Islamist group, formerly linked to al-Qaeda. Their prominence is definitely a factor raising concerns.
Who else is implicated in the killings?
Witnesses and rights groups name Turkish-backed militias and other jihadist fighters. There's even graffiti in Sanabar suggesting they're still around.
So Amnesty wants investigations into videos showing official forces present during these incidents.
Yes, the head of General Security Forces for the Latakia region, Mustafa Kunaifati, did admit some civilian involvement and individual cases from his own units. He said arrests were made and claimed his forces actually intervened to protect civilians.
And some witnesses support that claim.
Some do, yes. Accounts of General Security Forces helping them escape and bury relatives. The head of HTS, Shura, has vowed prosecution. There's a special committee looking into both the insurgent attacks and the pro-government violence. About 30 people arrested so far.
What do the villagers in Sanabar want now?
They want the General Security Forces to handle policing and for the other factions to leave. Really, the future of Sanabar is a major test for Syria and how it handles its minorities.
Okay, let's turn now to Israel and Gaza. The Israeli army is calling up a significant number of reservists.
Tens of thousands, yes. The stated aim is to intensify and expand operations in Gaza. They want to return hostages and defeat Hamas.
Expanding into new areas.
That's the plan. And also to destroy all infrastructure, both above and below ground. Reports suggest this expansion was approved after President Trump's recent trip to the region.
What's the status of hostage negotiations?
Stalled, unfortunately. International efforts for a ceasefire and the release of the 59 remaining hostages, only 24 are believed to still be alive, have failed so far.
And no hostages released since the fighting resumed in March.
None. Not since the last ceasefire collapsed on March 18th. Israel has seized large areas of Gaza since then, leading to more displacement.
And there's the aid situation, too.
A major point of concern. Israel implemented a 2-month blockade on humanitarian aid, saying it's to pressure Hamas. But aid agencies report acute shortages, even alleging a starvation policy, which could be a war crime. Israel rejects that accusation.
This expanded offensive must be putting a strain on things.
On the reservists, definitely. And it's increasing anxiety among hostage families who are urging for a deal.
There are still questions about Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategy.
Yes, persistent questions about his intentions. He frequently faces accusations, which he denies, of sabotaging deals and prolonging the war for his own political survival. After 19 months of war, there's still no public plan for the day after.
Did the military present a plan?
They presented a staged defensive plan to Netanyahu on Friday. But significantly, thousands of reservists have signed letters demanding the government focus on getting a hostage deal done.
And protests continue in Israel.
Fresh protests across the country calling for an end to the conflict. The mother of one captive called it a needless war at a Tel Aviv protest. Tragically, 2 more Israeli soldiers were killed in Gaza on Sunday.
There was also a missile incident.
Yes, a missile fired from Yemen by the Iran-backed Houthis landed near Ben Gurion Airport. Netanyahu vowed retaliation.
And the Houthis made threats.
They threatened what they called an aerial blockade on Israel, targeting airports, specifically in response to the announced plans for Gaza.
What are the latest casualty figures from Gaza?
The Hamas-run health ministry reported 40 killed and 125 injured in the previous 24 hours.
Just to recap the timeline.
The Israeli campaign started after the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, which killed about 1,200 people and saw 251 taken hostage. The reported death toll in Gaza during the war is now at least 52,535 Palestinians.
Moving to the United States now, President Trump has announced plans for Alcatraz.
Yes, quite unexpectedly. On Truth Social, he ordered the reopening and expansion of Alcatraz prison.
The one in San Francisco Bay.
That's the one. Closed back in 1963, now a major tourist attraction. He says it will house America's most ruthless and violent offenders and serve as a symbol of law, order, and justice.
Which government agencies are involved?
He's directed the Bureau of Prisons, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and Homeland Security.
This fits with some of his other policies, doesn't it?
It does seem to. You might recall his policy of sending alleged gang members to a prison in El Salvador. And he's talked before about sending homegrown criminals abroad.
Alcatraz has quite a history.
Oh, absolutely. Naval Defense Fort, then a military prison, finally the high-security federal penitentiary famous for inmates like Al Capone. It closed mainly because operating costs were just so high, being on an island.
Also in U.S. news, Trump addressed the third-term question.
Yes, in an NBC interview, he denied considering a third presidential term, despite some past comments and even Trump 2028 merchandise appearing.
Did he acknowledge the constitutional limit?
He did, mentioning the 22nd Amendment's 2-term limit. But he also noted that many people ask him to run again and listed some potential Republican successors.
And on the economy, he has a positive outlook despite recent figures.
He maintained everything's okay, even though his tariff plan has been linked to economic shrinkage. He called it a transition period and expects the greatest economy. He also hinted the tariffs might become permanent.
What about the impact on consumers?
He claimed Americans won't see fewer goods, just maybe less variety. On due process questions, he referred to brilliant lawyers and the Supreme Court.
That Supreme Court reference comes after a recent ruling.
Yes, the court ruled his administration must facilitate the return of a migrant who was wrongly deported, something the administration had claimed it lacked authority to do.
What about foreign policy mentions, Greenland, Canada?
He didn't rule out using military force regarding Greenland, though said it's not under consideration for Canada, despite ongoing trade issues. He reiterated his criticism that Canada isn't paying its fair share for defense. Canadian Prime Minister Carney is scheduled to visit the White House soon.
And the immigration emergency declaration.
Trump defended keeping it in place, claiming he achieved the most secure border ever, but said the emergency now lies within the court system because of challenges to deportations. No plans to lift the order anytime soon.
And new tariffs on movies.
100% tariffs on non-U.S. movies. He cited a dying U.S. movie industry and called foreign incentives messaging and propaganda, framing it as a national security threat. He wants movies made in America again.
What was the Commerce Secretary's response?
Secretary Letnick simply said, "We're on it."
It's worth noting U.S. movie production spending actually fell 26% since 2022, while places like Australia, Canada, and the UK saw increases.
This could impact the U.S. industry, too. It's already been impacted. China reduced its quota of American films, partly due to existing U.S. tariffs. Trump has hit China hardest with tariffs, potentially reaching 245% with new ones. China retaliated with 125% on U.S. goods. He did hint, though, that he might lower China tariffs eventually because, as he put it, they want to do business.
Let's head to Brazil now. Police stopped a potential bombing.
Yes, at a huge Lady Gaga concert on Copacabana Beach in Rio. Over 2 million people were there.
What was the motive?
Apparently, the suspects were recruited to use improvised explosives just to gain notoriety on social media. Police arrested the alleged mastermind and a teenager.
Did Lady Gaga's team know beforehand?
No, they reportedly learned about it from the media after the concert was over. The group involved allegedly spread hate speech targeting children, adolescents, and the LGBTQ+ community. The mastermind was arrested for illegal firearm possession, the teenager for possessing child pornography. They were apparently promoting radicalization among teenagers, too.
How did the police uncover the plot?
Through intelligence work targeting online groups, using coded language to encourage violence. They called it Operation Fake Monster. They seized electronic devices.
And the concert itself, it was a big event for Rio.
Huge. It was funded partly to help revitalize Rio's economy, expected to bring in about $100 million. Security was massive, 5,000 officers, metal detectors, drones, facial recognition. Lady Gaga performed, apparently, quite emotionally, wearing Brazil-themed costumes.
Now to Romania, where there's been a presidential election rerun.
That's right. The nationalist candidate, George Simion, won the first round quite comfortably, with 40% of the vote. He's the clear favorite for the runoff on May 18th.
Who came second?
It was a tie for second between the liberal mayor of Bucharest, Nicu Zerdan, and the governing coalition candidate, Crin Antonescu, both around 21%.
Why was there a rerun?
The initial election 6 months ago was won by a radical outsider, Călin Georgescu, but it was annulled amid allegations of fraud and Russian interference. Georgescu was barred from this rerun.
What's Simion's platform?
He thanked voters, framing it as being about Romanians feeling lied to and defending their identity and rights. He admires Trump, believes in a strong NATO, and says he'd favor NATO bases and U.S. troops in Romania if he becomes president.
This hasn't gone unnoticed elsewhere.
No. U.S. Vice President Vance criticized Romania for annulling the first election, which strained relations. The result is being watched nervously in Europe, Washington, Kyiv, and Moscow. Romania's position is crucial for weapons transit to Ukraine, and it hosts U.S. missile defense systems and NATO air policing bases.
And the Trump administration's view?
They're reassessing their commitment. A visa waiver program was abruptly canceled just before the election. One expert warned that if Simion wins, given the president's veto power over security policy, further help to Ukraine could be in jeopardy.
What's Simion's stance on Russia and Ukraine?
He calls Russia the biggest danger and says the war in Ukraine is stuck. He hopes for peace talks organized by Trump. Public resentment over support for Ukrainian refugees was a key campaign point for him, though he denies being pro-Russian.
Okay, let's turn to the situation in Ukraine and the cost for Russian forces.
The data for 2024 is stark. It's shaping up to be the deadliest year yet for Russian forces there, with at least 45,287 confirmed killed so far. That's almost 3 times the number from 2022, and more than the heavy losses during the Bakhmut fighting in 2023.
And the pattern of losses has changed.
Yes. Early in the war, losses came in waves tied to specific battles. But in 2024, there's been a consistent month-on-month increase as the front line slowly edges forward. It's estimated Russia lost 27 soldiers for every kilometer of Ukrainian territory captured this year.
Where are these numbers coming from?
It's a collaboration between the Our Correspondent Russian Service, the independent Russian media outlet Mediazona, and volunteers. They identify killed soldiers using open sources like social media posts, news reports, and official announcements. They've confirmed 106,745 deaths since the start of the full-scale invasion.
And they believe the real number is higher.
Yes, they estimate their count represents maybe 45–65% of the total deaths, suggesting the actual figure could be between 164,000 and 237,000.
Was there a particularly deadly day identified?
February 20th, 2024. At least 201 Russian soldiers died that day. The analysis points to a Ukrainian HIMARS strike on a training ground near Volnovakha in occupied Donetsk during a medal ceremony. At least 65 were killed there, including a commander.
This wasn't reported by Russia.
No mention in official Russian Ministry of Defense reports. Analysis prioritizes exact death dates when available, otherwise uses funeral or report dates.
You mentioned the shift from wave-like losses.
Right. In 2022-23, you saw spikes during big battles like Vuhledar and Bakhmut. But 2024 shows this steady, grinding increase linked to offensives around places like Avdiivka, Robotyne, Pokrovsk, and Toretsk.
There was also a significant incident in August.
Yes, during Ukraine's incursion into Russia's Kursk region. A large number of Russian conscripts were killed, about 1,226 deaths confirmed in just 1 week.
But the heaviest overall losses were during the Eastern Advance.
Between September and November 2024, yes. That's when Russia captured the logistical hub of Vuhledar. The Institute for the Study of War estimates Russia captured about 2,356 kilometers during that period, at a cost of at least 11,678 confirmed deaths, likely higher in reality.
So overall, in 2024,
Russia captured about 4,168 kilometers games. The cost, based on confirmed deaths, is roughly 27 Russian soldiers killed per square kilometer gained, and that doesn't even count the wounded.
how is Russia replacing these losses?
Through significantly increased recruitment efforts. They apparently recruited more people than they lost in late 2024. They've raised one-time sign-up bonuses and combat salaries, often 5 to 7 times the average wage. Some volunteers are reportedly signing up to avoid prosecution for crimes.
And volunteers are a growing category of casualties.
They're the fastest growing category, making up about 25% of those identified. Many received minimal training, maybe just 10-14 days, especially in 2023 and 2024.
Are certain regions disproportionately affected?
The Republic of Bashkortostan has the highest number of confirmed deaths at 4,836. Many are from rural areas, and a significant portion, 38%, had no prior military experience. The signing bonus in the regional capital, Ufa, was particularly high.
And the data limitations.
Open source data is inherently incomplete. It doesn't account for bodies left on the battlefield or losses among proxy forces from the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. Estimates suggest 21,000 to 23,500 proxy fighters might have been killed by September 2024. Adding that could bring the total potential Russian side fatalities to somewhere between 185,000 and 260,700.
Let's move to Peru now, a tragic story involving miners.
Yes, very grim. 13 miners were found dead in the Poderosa gold mine in Pataz province after being kidnapped.
What led to the kidnapping?
They were apparently sent by the mining company to confront illegal miners operating in the area. A criminal gang trying to gain control of the mine kidnapped them and held them hostage in a mine shaft.
For how long?
The gang sent threatening messages to the miners' relatives for about a week before the bodies were found.
Is this kind of violence common there?
There's been a spike in criminal attacks targeting mines in recent years. The Poderosa company, which employs about 8,000 people, expressed disappointment, saying police action against illegal mining has been insufficient and the climate of violence escalating.
There was video evidence mentioned.
A Peruvian news site reported on a video allegedly showing the miners being executed at point-blank range.
How long has illegal mining been an issue for Poderosa?
Since 2020, illegal mining operations have reportedly taken over several of Poderosa's concessions, forcing the company to abandon areas and endangering both their employees and legitimate artisanal miners.
Were there other recent incidents?
Yes, in March, criminals allegedly working with illegal miners killed 2 contractors near one of the mine sites. Also in March, illegal miners blew up a power tower and tried to invade mine sites. Poderosa said police and army couldn't control the situation and called on the government to restore order.
The company feels like crime is operating freely.
They said illegal mining and organized crime operate with absolute impunity. Peru, remember, is one of the world's largest gold producers, accounting for about 4% of the annual global supply.
Turning to France now, another kidnapping story. This one linked to cryptocurrency.
That's right. The father of an unnamed French cryptocurrency millionaire was rescued by police in a Paris suburb. He'd been kidnapped in central Paris a few days earlier.
How was he found?
He was rescued on Saturday from a house in Palaiseau. He reportedly had a missing finger when found. 4 suspects were arrested.
Is this becoming a trend?
This is the 3rd abduction linked to France's crypto industry just this year. The victim, in his 50s, was targeted because of his son's wealth. The kidnappers demanded a ransom of 5 to 7 million euros.
How did the police find him?
Reports suggest they tracked phone signals to the house. The suspects are being questioned. The Interior Minister congratulated the investigators.
What about the other incidents?
Less than 4 months ago, David Balland, a co-founder of the crypto hardware wallet company Ledger, and his wife were abducted. They were rescued within days, but Balland also had a finger cut off. A €10 million ransom was demanded in that case, and 7 people were arrested.
And the third one?
Back in early January, a 56-year-old man was found alive in the boot of a car near Le Mans. His abductors had tried to export money from his son, a cryptocurrency influencer living in Dubai. It seems crypto wealth is making some individuals targets.
Okay, let's look at Sudan now. The conflict seems to be spreading geographically.
Yes, significantly. The Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, launched a drone attack on the military airport in Port Sudan on Sunday. That's the de facto capital of the military-led government, and it's the first time it's been targeted like this.
What with it?
The Army spokesperson said the RSF launched several suicide drones targeting Osman Digna Air Base, a goods warehouse, and some civilian facilities. They reported limited damage and no injuries. The RSF hasn't commented yet.
Remind us about the conflict timeline.
Sudan has been in conflict since April 2023. It started as a power struggle between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the RSF, just ahead of a planned transition back to civilian rule.
The human cost has been immense.
Truly devastating. An estimated 150,000 people dead and around 12 million displaced in just over 2 years. The UN calls it the world's largest and most devastating humanitarian crisis. Over 30 million people need aid, millions face acute food shortages, potentially famine.
And Port Sudan was considered safe until now.
Relatively, yes. It had avoided the bombardment seen elsewhere and became the government's headquarters after this F lost control of Khartoum. UN agencies and many displaced civilians had moved there for safety.
So this attack is a shock.
Definitely. A traveler described being evacuated after the strikes. There's unverified footage showing an explosion and smoke. The airport was closed and flights suspended.
How is the country divided currently?
Broadly, the RSF controls most of the Darfur region and parts of the south. The government controls the east and north, including Port Sudan.
Is this part of a pattern of RSF drone attacks?
It seems so. It's the latest in a string of drone attacks on army-held infrastructure. Kassala was attacked just the day before.
Has the military made any gains recently?
This SAF has retaken some territory, including the presidential palace in Khartoum back in March. That was seen as a potential turning point, but it's still unlikely either side can achieve a total victory soon.
This isn't Sudan's first civil war.
No, it's the third in 70 years, and many consider it the worst. After a coup in 2021, a council of generals ran the country. The conflict is centered around the two main figures from that council, General Al-Burhan of the SAF and General Hemeti of the RSF. They disagreed on the transition to civilian rule and how the RSF would be integrated into the national army.
And international efforts haven't worked.
Peace efforts have failed so far. Both sides are reportedly backed by foreign weapons suppliers.
Let's shift to Australia now in the aftermath of their federal election. A tough result for the opposition.
Extremely tough. The opposition Liberal Party is reeling after what's being described as a bruising defeat, possibly their worst ever, in Saturday's election.
And the leader lost his seat.
Yes, Liberal leader Peter Dutton lost his own seat of Bixen, which he'd held for 24 years. He's now out of Parliament. It's actually the first time an opposition leader has lost their seat while also losing the election overall. Labour's Ali France defeated him.
What was the Prime Minister's take?
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said Australians voted for unity rather than division. The Liberals saw crushing losses, particularly in major cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Adelaide.
What are Liberals saying internally?
Liberal MP Keith Woollahan is calling for a serious review of systemic issues. He acknowledged things went wrong and they need to listen. A former advisor, Andrew Carswell, was blunt, calling it the failure of the Dutton experiment and a complete catastrophe, saying Australians had a clear hesitation with Peter Dutton.
Was President Trump mentioned as a factor?
Yes, his looming presence was cited by some commentators as something that thwarted Dutton's campaign.
So now there's a leadership contest.
A scramble is underway to find a new Liberal leader. Potential contenders include the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor, Deputy Leader Sussan Ley, Shadow Immigration Minister Dan Tehan, and Shadow Minister of Defense Andrew Hastie. There's no clear frontrunner yet. The party really needs to regroup and figure out a new strategy.
Back to the U.S., a really unusual missing persons case resolution in Wisconsin.
Quite remarkable. A woman named Audrey Backerberg, who went missing back on July 7, 1962, when she was 20 years old, has been found alive and well.
After more than 60 years. How?
The Sauk County Sheriff's Office reviewed the cold case. They determined her disappearance was by her own choice, and there was no criminal activity involved. She's living outside Wisconsin now, but they haven't released further details to protect her privacy.
What were the circumstances of her disappearance?
A missing persons advocacy group noted she was married with 2 young children at the time. Just days before she vanished, she had filed a complaint against her husband, alleging he beat her and threatened her life. She had married very young, at 15.
What happened on the day she left?
She reportedly left home to pick up her paycheck. The babysitter, who was only 14, said they hitchhiked together to Madison, then took a bus to Indianapolis. The babysitter wanted to return home and said Audrey was last seen walking away from the bus stop there.
And the case went cold.
Yes. Numerous leads were pursued over the years, but nothing panned out until this recent review.
How did they finally find her?
A detective found a link through her sister's online ancestry account. He managed to speak to Audrey by phone.
What did she say?
The detective reported she just was removed and moved on, led her life, sounded happy, confident in her decision, no regrets, an extraordinary resolution.
Now to Texas, and Elon Musk's SpaceX facility getting its own city name.
That's right. The area around the SpaceX launch site at the southern tip of Texas is set to become an incorporated city called Starbase. Residents voted overwhelmingly in favor, 212 for, only 6 against.
And most residents are SpaceX employees.
Yes, most of the 283 eligible voters work for SpaceX. Musk tweeted, "Starbase, Texas is now a real city."
How large is this new city?
It covers about 1.6 square miles. It was very sparsely populated before SpaceX started buying up land back in 2012.
What will the city government do?
It'll have a mayor and 2 commissioners, handling things like planning, taxation, and other local issues. Some nearby residents oppose the incorporation, citing environmental concerns.
SpaceX has built up the area quite a bit.
Since 2012, yes.
Yeah.
Housing, facilities. Musk himself has a residence there. There's even a meme street and famously a vandalized bust of Musk. About 500 people live in or very near the area now.
Was this incorporation planned for a while?
Rumors circulated for years. A petition was filed in December 2024, which led to this vote.
Who's the first mayor?
Bobby Peden, a SpaceX vice president. He ran unopposed, as did the 2 other commissioners who also have ties to SpaceX.
What kind of city will it be?
A Type C city under Texas law for populations under 5,000. It'll be able to levy property tax up to 1.5%.
Is there related legislation being considered?
Yes. A controversial bill in the Texas legislature could give Starbase control over local highway closures and access to Boca Chica Beach and the adjacent state park during launches. Currently, Cameron County manages that access. SpaceX wants to significantly increase launches, from maybe 5 a year to 25.
Is there opposition to that bill?
The Cameron County judge opposes it, so potential tussles over beach access seem likely.
This is part of Musk's broader move to Texas.
It fits that pattern, yes. He moved operations and headquarters for SpaceX, Tesla, X, formerly Twitter, and The Boring Company from California to Texas, citing more favorable regulations and his opposition to California politics. Though near Austin, where X and Boring are headquartered, there hasn't been the same kind of dedicated housing development. Workers mostly live in surrounding communities.
What about the environmental concerns?
Environmental groups continue to criticize SpaceX's impact on local wildlife, light pollution, and launch debris. The company was fined in 2024 for dumping wastewater, though they claimed it was just disagreements over paperwork and that they follow all laws.
Moving to New York now, the trial of Sean Diddy Combs is underway.
Yes, jury selection began on Monday in New York. He's facing very serious federal charges.
What are the specific charges?
Racketeering conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking, and 2 counts of transportation with intent to engage in prostitution. If convicted on the racketeering charge alone, he could face life in prison.
And there are civil lawsuits as well.
Dozens of them, yes. Allegations include drugging, assault, rape, intimidation, and trying to silence victims.
What's Combs' position?
He's pleaded not guilty to all the criminal charges. His team has dismissed the civil lawsuits as attempts for a quick payday.
Can you give us some background on Combs?
He's been a major figure in music and business for decades. Rose to fame in the 90s hip-hop scene, founded Bad Boy Records, launching careers like Mary J. Blige and Biggie Smalls. He also had successful business ventures, like his partnership with Ciroc Vodka. He received a Grammy nomination just last year and an MTV Global Icon Award.
What do the racketeering allegations involve?
They allege a conspiracy involving kidnapping, drugging, and coercing women into sex, sometimes using firearms or threats.
There was a raid on his mansion.
Yes, federal agents raided his L.A. mansion. Reports claim they found items allegedly used for orgies, which he reportedly called freak-offs, including drugs and baby oil.
How many potential accusers are there?
A lawyer in Texas has claimed that over 100 women and men have either filed or intend to file lawsuits against him.
Can you give an example of a lawsuit?
One filed in December 2023 by Jane Doe alleged she was gang-raped by Combs and others back in 2003 when she was 17 after being given drugs and alcohol. Again, Combs' legal team dismisses these as publicity stunts.
When did these legal troubles really escalate?
It started gaining major public attention with a lawsuit filed by his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, known as Cassie, in late 2023. She alleged years of violent abuse and rape. That suit was settled very quickly, though Combs maintained his innocence.
And many more followed.
Yes. Dozens of sexual assault lawsuits have been filed since then, with allegations dating back as far as 1991. Combs denies them all.
Wasn't there some video footage released?
Yes. In 2024, CCTV footage from 2016 surfaced, showing Combs kicking and dragging Cassie in a hotel hallway. He issued an apology after that, saying he took full responsibility for his actions in the video.
But he maintains innocence on the civil allegations generally.
Consistently calls them sickening and attempts for a quick payday. His lawyer stated regarding the federal charges that they have full confidence in the facts and integrity of the judicial process, and that Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone.
Were there any pre-trial motions?
His team tried to get one of the prostitution charges dismissed, claiming racial targeting, but that was denied. The defense also argued Combs led a certain lifestyle as a swinger and thought having multiple sex partners, including sex workers, was appropriate.
Did prosecutors offer a plea deal?
Prosecutors revealed in court filings that Combs had rejected a plea deal.
Where's Combs being held?
He's been at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn since his arrest in September 2024. Bail was denied. The judge deemed him a serious flight risk.
Have his lawyers raised concerns about his detention?
They've cited what they call horrific jail conditions. Prosecutors, on the other hand, allege Combs has contacted potential witnesses in relentless efforts to corruptly influence testimony.
So the trial starts properly after jury selection?
Yes. Once the panel is selected, the prosecution expects their case to take about 3 weeks, with the defense taking about 1 week.
Where's the trial taking place?
In front of Judge Subramanian in Manhattan. It's expected to be open to the public, but no online streaming, and no cameras or phones allowed in the courtroom.
What's the potential sentence if convicted?
As mentioned, up to life for racketeering. There's a 15-year minimum for sex trafficking if convicted, and a 10-year maximum for the transportation for prostitution charges.
Okay, shifting gears completely now, the end of an era for a familiar tech product.
Yes, Microsoft is closing down the consumer version of Skype for good on May 5th.
Skype. Wow, that takes you back.
Doesn't it? Launched way back in 2003. For years, it was the way many people stayed in touch long distance, especially with video calls, before things like Zoom, WhatsApp, and even Microsoft's own Teams became dominant.
So Microsoft is focusing on Teams instead.
Exactly. Skype for Business, the enterprise version, will continue for now, but the regular consumer Skype is shutting down.
There must be a lot of memories tied up with Skype.
Oh, definitely. Stories have been shared online. A couple, Wang and Owen Williams, whose long-distance romance blossomed over daily Skype video calls. They're married now.
Any other examples?
A woman named Erica talked about using Skype messages sent to her deceased husband's account, messages he had sent on work trips, as a way to find closure, even replying to herself sometimes. Another one, Susan Bertotti, living in Chile, speaks to her 99-year-old mother in the UK via Skype every single day, for 15 years now. She said it will be a huge loss. And a businessman, Stan Calderwood, relied on it for cheap international calls and now needs an alternative.
Did Skype still have many users?
Surprisingly, yes. Almost 28 million active users as of March last year. So it wasn't insignificant.
What happens to users, accounts, and data?
Microsoft is encouraging users to move to Microsoft Teams. The free version offers similar core features like calls and messaging. Users can also export their Skype data.
What about paying customers?
People with Skype credit or subscriptions can use the Skype dial pad feature within Teams to make calls until their credit or subscription runs out.
Is it used officially anywhere?
UK's Ministry of Defence is retiring most of its Skype use, though a small group will continue using the business version. It really marks the end of a very recognizable piece of technology.
Let's go to Colombia now. Wind farms are causing some complex issues.
Yes, in La Guajira, northern Colombia. It's part of the country's push towards renewable energy, but it's bringing both promise and pain, particularly for the indigenous Wayuu people.
What's the specific problem?
One community leader, Jose Luis Iguaran, lives near the Guajira 1 wind farm, which has 10 turbines. 15 more are being built nearby, and dozens more are planned across the region. He says the noise from the turbines at night disturbs their dreams.
And dreams are important in Wayuu culture.
Extremely important. They see dreams as sacred, a bridge to the spiritual world, so the disturbance is deeply felt.
Have there been benefits for the community?
His community has seen some benefits from Guajira 1, things like clean water access, better roads, some brick houses funded by the energy company Isagen, which is owned by Canada's Brookfield.
Are there direct payments too?
Yes, Isagen also pays an annual fee, a percentage of electricity revenues, and 20% of carbon credit sales to 3 local communities near the wind farm. Iguaran himself sees these energy projects as vital for development in what is Colombia's second poorest region.
But not everyone agrees.
No. Another Wayuu man, Aaron Laguna, a fisherman, feels the wind farms are creating division. He complains about a lack of transparency, poor compensation, disrespect for their culture, and even corruption in how agreements are handled and resources managed.
Have these concerns led to conflict?
Yes, disputes with the companies and, sadly, conflict within and between Wayuu communities. Joanna Barney from the think tank Indipaz warns against the idea that if it is green, it is automatically good. She points to a lack of strong legal frameworks to properly assess the environmental and social impacts.
Have companies faced pushback?
Definitely. A Spanish company, EDP Renovables, shelved 2 planned wind farms because they were no longer economically viable after the number of indigenous communities requiring compensation doubled. An Italian company, Enel, exited another project due to constant protests halting construction.
Even Guajira 1 faced issues.
Yes, roadblocks, which are a common form of protest there. Indipaz has recorded attacks like robberies and kidnappings against energy firm employees, and even displacement and violence between communities fighting over the wind farms. They call it the wind wars.
There's a cultural disconnect.
Anthropologist Wilder Guerra describes it as 2 worlds talking. The way you traditionally see the winds, not just as a resource, but as people, 8 distinct mythological beings that need to be respected. Companies and the government just see wind as a resource to be harnessed.
Why is Colombia pushing wind energy so hard?
The country relies heavily on hydroelectricity, which makes it vulnerable when reservoir levels are low due to drought. Wind energy currently makes up only about 0.1% of their energy mix, so there's huge potential and need for diversification.
Are energy companies aware of the conflicts?
They are worried. AES Colombia, developing the largest wind energy cluster, claims they have open dialogue, offer fair compensation, and provide benefits like water access and shares in carbon credits. But they also say government help is needed to resolve the underlying community conflicts.
What does Aaron Laguna's community want?
He highlights that La Guajira has been historically neglected, poor education, health care, no running water for most rural communities. His community wants the company building a nearby wind farm to expand their small saltwater treatment plant.
Is there an irony here?
A significant one. Despite all these turbines going up, none of the electricity generated will reach Laguna's village, at least not in the medium term. The power is sent elsewhere on the grid, while his village relies on generators. The Wayuu are anxious about being left in the dark, literally, amidst all this talk of clean energy development.
Moving to Sweden now, a shocking incident in Uppsala.
Yes, truly horrific. 3 young men, aged between 15 and 20, were shot dead inside a hair salon in Uppsala on Tuesday, just before the Big Walpurgis Festival.
Walpurgis is a major event there.
Huge, especially in Uppsala, which is a big university city. It's typically a very convivial spring festival on April 30th with bonfires and large celebrations. The shooting cast a real shadow over it this year. Police tape is still up outside the salon near Vaksala Square.
How did people react?
Students and residents were shocked and scared. One student, Yaman Alchum, said it was really sad and scary because he had actually been to that salon before.
What are the details of the shooting?
Witnesses reported 2 victims were shot in the head while still wearing barber capes. It happened in the busy city center during the afternoon commute, with lots of students around.
Was it mistaken for something else initially?
Some people thought the loud bangs were fireworks, which are common around Walpurgis. Then police and ambulances arrived, blocked the street. Helicopters and drones were used in the search. A masked suspect reportedly escaped on an electric scooter.
Were arrests made quickly?
A 16-year-old boy was arrested just 2 hours later. initially under strong suspicion. However, he was released by Friday because the case against him weakened.
Have others been arrested since?
Yes, on Saturday, police confirmed 6 arrests had been made, ranging in age from under 18 to 45. One of them is suspected of actually carrying out the killings.
Did the festival go ahead?
Police advised people to continue with their plans, promising extra resources and suggesting it was likely an isolated incident. Tens of thousands did attend the traditional student raft race, bonfires, and spring ceremony, but people said there was a subtle heaviness.
Did people feel safe?
One student felt there was more security, but his friend noted something worrying after. She said she no longer has a strong reaction to shootings in Sweden because they become so frequent. She said, "There's been so many shootings lately, everywhere in Sweden."
Is gun crime a major issue in Sweden?
It has become one of Europe's hotspots for gun crime, mostly linked to criminal gang networks. Research also shows the perpetrators involved are getting increasingly younger.
What did the Prime Minister say?
PM Ulf Kristersson called it an extremely violent act and underlined that the wave of violence is not over. Police are investigating links to gang crime, but say it's too soon to confirm motives.
Is there a connection to underage perpetrators?
It's known that gangs sometimes contract children, as those under 15 aren't criminally responsible in Sweden. The government has proposed legislation to allow wiretapping of children to prevent gang recruitment and wants to tighten gun laws generally.
This comes after another mass shooting recently.
Yes, in February, 10 people were killed in a mass shooting at an adult education center in Örebro. The suspect in that case legally owned the weapon and was later found dead.
How is the mood in Uppsala now?
Tributes and flowers have been left outside the salon. Young people seem visibly shaken. One 16-year-old who knew one of the victims said it felt unreal.
Let's talk about something completely different, a surprise hit video game.
Yes, Claire Obscure. Expedition 33. It's a role-playing game inspired by classics like Final Fantasy, and it's become a bit of a sensation.
How successful has it been?
Sold 1 million copies in just 3 days. It even topped some music charts, which is unusual for a game soundtrack. French President Macron praised it.
Who created it?
Guillaume Brush, who used to work at the big game developer Ubisoft. He started it as a passion project back in 2020, apparently out of boredom during the COVID lockdowns.
What's the story behind its development?
It's quite unconventional. Lots of random connections made through Reddit messages, what Broche calls massive luck.
What's the game about?
It's set in the city called Lumiere, which is overshadowed by a giant monolith. On the monolith is a glowing numeral that counts down each year. An entity called the Paintress appears annually and makes everyone who is the age shown on the monolith vanish. The game follows a group on a quest to destroy her before she reaches their age 33.
Sounds intriguing. What makes it stand out?
The setup is definitely unique. It has a distinct aesthetic inspired by 19th century France, and crucially, it uses old-school turn-based battles, which kind of goes against modern gaming trends, but seems to have resonated.
How did Guillaume build the team?
Mostly through Reddit and online forums. For example, the lead writer, Jennifer Svedbergan, was in lockdown in Australia and responded to a request for a voice actor for a demo. She ended up writing the whole game.
So he left Ubisoft?
Yes. Formed his own studio, Sandfall Interactive, in Montpellier, France. They secured funding from Kepler Interactive, and the team grew to about 30 people, many found in similarly unconventional ways.
Like the composer.
Lorien Testard. He'd never worked on games before. Guillaume found him via SoundCloud. Jennifer calls it the Guillaume effect, finding really cool people. Guillaume credits COVID, freeing people up, and just massive luck, saying the first person he contacted often said yes.
Was there a method to his recruitment?
He targeted people whose work seemed in line with the direction he wanted. For instance, he shared specific musical references with the composer.
The production values are high for a small team.
Critics have praised them, saying they're rival games made by much larger studios. This is attributed partly to advancements in game development tools, but also the backing from Kepler Interactive.
Did they attract big names?
Yes. Voice actors like Charlie Cox, Andy Serkis, Jennifer English, and Ben Starr are involved.
How did the core team manage?
By wearing a lot of different hats. Jennifer even did translation work. The team is mostly junior, but described as incredibly invested and talented. A real indie success story.
Let's turn to Europe now, and reflections around Victory in Europe Day. The mood was described as somber.
Yes, particularly concerning transatlantic ties. One former NATO figure was quoted saying it felt more like a funeral this year, largely due to the impact President Trump's presidency is having.
VE Day commemorates the end of World War II in Europe, right?
Exactly. The Allied triumph over Nazi Germany, over hatred, dictatorship, expansionism, and horrific crimes against humanity. Around 51 million Allied soldiers and civilians died in that fight.
But 80 years later, the focus is shifting.
A lot of the commentary centered on President Trump being perceived as a threat to the bonds, security, democracy, rule of law that have linked Europe and the U.S. since WWII. Whether that's entirely accurate or overly simplistic is part of the debate.
Russia's role in WWII is complex in this context.
Immensely complex. Around 24 million Soviets died fighting Germany. They were allies during the war for what one former Czech ambassador, Michael Zantovsky, called existential reasons, but he argues they were never a true friend of the West.
And splits appeared immediately after the war.
Right away. Disagreements even over when VE Day should be marked. The West chose May 8th, the USSR May 9th. Russia still marks it on May 9th.
The mood on VE Day varies across Europe, too.
Very much so. Western Europe celebrates liberation. But for Central and Eastern Europe, liberation from Nazi rule often led straight into decades under communist regimes imposed by Moscow. So their view of VE Day can be more ambiguous.
Zantovsky mentioned how history was taught under communism.
He said in Czechoslovakia, the West's role in WWII was suppressed. Liberty was attributed solely to the Soviets. Yet Czechoslovakia was taken over by communists in 1948 and invaded by the USSR in 1968.
How does Russia mark VE Day now?
With large, triumphalist military parades. President Putin frequently labels Ukraine's current leadership as Nazis.
Didn't Putin call for a ceasefire around VE Day?
Yes, a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine. The official reason was humanitarian grounds, which sounded ironic given the ongoing invasion. Many presumed it was actually to ensure the military parade in Moscow, attended by foreign dignitaries like China's Xi Jinping, went off without incident.
Has the Ukraine war affected how Eastern Europeans view this history?
Zantovsky says, for Czechs, the invasion brought back vivid memories of occupation, leading to strong support for Ukraine. He said, our sense of security is threatened once again.
And Trump's rhetoric is causing alarm in Europe.
Widespread shock, yes, particularly his apparent respect for Putin, while simultaneously threatening traditional allies like Canada and Denmark.
The U.S. has long been seen as Europe's closest friend post-WWII.
Since the Marshall Plan and the security guarantees provided through NATO, absolutely.
It wasn't pure altruism.
No. U.S. aid was also aimed at containing communism and gaining a geostrategic foothold during the Cold War. The concept of the West, based on shared security goals and values, was born then.
Is that friendship fraying now?
With no common enemy like the Soviet Union, perhaps. Trump has indicated he no longer feels threatened by Russia in the same way.
What did a former U.S. NATO ambassador say?
Julie Smith commented that shared history, not enough to propel the relationship forward anymore.
But isn't the Ukraine war a major European conflict?
It's the largest since WWII. And with Russia on a war economy, there are fears it could spread. Europe certainly still feels threatened by Russia. They were shocked when Trump seemed to blame Ukraine for the bloodshed.
Was there a specific turning point in European public opinion?
The press conference Trump and Vice President Vance held with Ukrainian President Zelensky back in February seems to have been significant.
How is that reflected in polling?
A YouGov poll from March showed large majorities in Western Europe now view the White House itself as a threat to peace and security.
What are the fears in Eastern Europe?
That Trump's attitude will embolden Putin. Historian Timothy Garton-Ash warned VD Day could become DE Day, Defeat in Europe Day, if Russia were to gain U.S. recognition for conquering parts of Ukraine.
So Europe feels left to defend itself.
There's nervousness about that, yes, especially as Trump accuses them of freeloading on defense. Boosting defense spending is now a major topic across Europe.
What's the view from Germany?
Peter Wittig, a former German ambassador to the U.S., said Berlin's message from Trump's first 100 days was stark. We cannot rely on the U.S. anymore. That's a massive shift for Germany, which relied heavily on U.S. security after WWII.
Has Germany acted on this?
Your Trump shock prompted Germany to lift its constitutional debt brake to invest heavily in its military.
And the European Commission president.
Ursula von der Leyen stated bluntly, the West as we knew it no longer exists.
Is this solely down to Trump?
The U.S. pivot towards Asia, viewing China as a top threat, actually predates Trump. It started under Obama and continued under Biden. A substantial U.S. withdrawal from Europe seems likely to continue, regardless of who wins the next U.S. election. There's a growing reluctance in the U.S. to finance allies.
So it's the end of an era.
Wittig calls it the end of engagement in Europe. There's a growing recognition in Europe that they must take more responsibility for their own defense, 80 years after VE Day.
Is there an upside to this?
Zantosky sees it as an opportunity brought about by crisis, fostering a sense of urgency about security that hasn't really existed in Europe for 30 years.
But boosting defense spending is difficult.
Very. Reaching the 4–5% of GDP some analysts think is needed to wean Europe off. U.S. reliance would require painful cuts elsewhere in government spending. It's unclear if voters would accept that.
What's the potential future for NATO?
Garton Ash wonders about a transition to a more European-led NATO, perhaps with the U.S. still involved, but in a different capacity.
What's the final thought from historians?
Historian Sir Anthony Selden stressed the need for a new generation of political leaders. He reflected, "Something has certainly broken. The future is uncertain. Do we have to go to war periodically to realize how terrible it is and to force us to work together?" A sobering question. WWI veterans would certainly hope not.
Let's move to pop culture now, and Katy Perry facing backlash.
Yes, she said recently she felt like a human piñata after weeks of online criticism and mockery.
What triggered it initially?
It seemed to really kick off after her Blue Origin spaceflight. Her reaction upon returning was widely mocked online. Now, trolls are apparently targeting her world tour, criticizing her dance moves and performances.
Is there a deeper issue, according to critics?
Music writer Michael Craig suggests Perry is sort of stuck between different pop cultures and feels increasingly out of touch.
How so?
Her early persona, very cartoony, fun, playful, worked incredibly well during her Teenage Dream and Prism album eras. But Craig argues she hasn't evolved since then. She hasn't had a solo #1 hit in quite some time.
Her comeback single didn't land well.
Woman's World, meant as a female empowerment anthem, was seen by many critics as lyrically shallow. Crucially, its production by Dr. Luke, who faced serious sexual assault allegations years ago, tainted Perry by association for many. The single failed to chart high.
Is the association with Dr. Luke the main problem?
Craig thinks her sort of spiritual "let love lead the way" messages don't really hold sway in the face of that decision to work with him. He described the single and the album it came from as having a regressive girl boss feel that felt underwhelming. Though he does note that Doja Cat has had huge success working with Dr. Luke without facing the same level of backlash.
Is this part of a pattern?
Craig points to her 2017 album Witness. That was billed as her purposeful pop era, but it was undermined by conflicting messaging and didn't connect well either. Seems like a pattern of attempted reinventions that haven't quite worked.
How has female pop stardom changed?
The current wave, think Chappell Roan, Sabrina Carpenter, Charlie XCX, often projects fierce self-assurance, but also relatability and a sense of authenticity that Perry, who seemed to want distance from her earlier pop persona, struggles to match now.
Her early work is seen differently now.
Her first big hit, I Kissed a Girl, was controversial even in 2008 for arguably fetishizing lesbianism. Now you have artists like Chappell Roan having huge success singing authentically about their own queer awakenings.
So inconsistency is an issue.
Craig argues her flip-flopping has jarred in an era where very defined pop star personas are the ones cutting through.
What about her Las Vegas residency?
That ran from 2021 to 2023 and embraced her surreal, campy image. It was actually a commercial and critical success, but it doesn't seem to be translating into winning over new fans for her current music.
The perception is she's cringeworthy.
Craig used that word, yeah. And the space flight, going on a billionaire's joyride during global crises, just feels tonally not ideal to many.
Is there more to the backlash than just her choices?
Absolutely. It also points to deeper issues in pop culture, particularly the toxicity of online fandoms.
Have her fans spoken out?
Yes. The creator of a fan community, Simon Diego, called the scale of abuse unbelievable. Fans organized to put up a supportive billboard for her in Times Square.
How did Perry respond to that?
That's when she made the piñata remark. Diego believes celebrities feel genuinely unsafe online. He noted Perry never posts pictures of her daughter's face, yet even the child was targeted with abuse after the spaceflight criticism started.
Is misogyny a factor?
The editor of Marie Claire Australia argued strongly that it is, saying there's a particular ire reserved for women like Perry. Ambitious, unapologetic, hypervisible. She pointed out that male celebrities have gone to space without anything like the same reaction.
Can she turn it around?
Craig thinks a hit single would certainly help steady the ship, but he doubts she'll return to her previous massive commercial highs.
Let's finish in Canada with a significant election result.
A very significant one. Mark Carney, leader of the Liberal Party, won the Canadian election. He campaigned heavily on standing up to President Trump's trade policies, which he termed chaotic territorial and trade ambitions.
Carney's background isn't typical for a politician.
No, he's the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He underwent quite a transformation during the campaign, from a perceived cerebral technocrat into a more fiery public orator.
What was his message?
At one rally in Edmonton, wearing an Oilers hockey jersey, he told the crowd Trump has ruptured the global economy, America's leadership is over. Tragedy. In this trade war, we will win. His supporters were chanting, "Elbows up," a hockey reference.
Was the result expected?
Not at all. It's described as staggering. Earlier in 2025, the Liberal Party was polling around 16%, while Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives were way ahead at 45%, looking set for a landslide.
What changed?
President Trump's actions seem to be the key catalyst. His imposition of national security tariffs on Canada, using fentanyl smuggling as a pretext, and his suggestion that Canada should just join the USA caused the polls to tighten dramatically.
And Carney took over the Liberal leadership late?
Just 8 weeks before the election, he quickly achieved a consistent poll lead. The election effectively became a verdict on who Canadians trusted more to handle their relationship with Trump.
Did Poilievre's past stance hurt him?
His previous overtures to Trump likely weakened his position. Carney managed to attract left-leaning voters who were scared of a conservative government, potentially amplified by Trump's influence.
What about Quebec?
The Liberals won back support from separatists there, who were concerned about maintaining Canada's independence from the U.S. As one commentator put it, nothing more unifying than a credible external threat.
What's Carney's strategy for dealing with the U.S. now?
He talks about seeking a win-win. He's been reminding Trump that Canada is the biggest client for 40 U.S. states, a key supplier of energy and fertilizer, and potentially could supply them with critical minerals. That last point is seen as a targeted negotiation tactic, implicitly suggesting Canada has choices about where its critical mineral development goes, Europe or the U.S.
Will he use this situation domestically?
The expectation is he'll use the external threat to push for transformations in the Canadian economy, diversifying trade and strategic alliances. Defense partnerships are likely, and expediting the stalled Canada-UK trade deal is probably on the agenda.
There was a symbolic announcement, too.
A historic one. King Charles will reopen the Canadian Parliament in person. It's the first time the monarch has done that since 1977. It's being seen as a stunning assertion of enduring independence from the White House.
What's the next big event?
All roads lead to the G7 summit, which Carney will host in Alberta in mid-June. That's just days before the current pause expires on the U.S. tariffs. If Canada and Mexico manage to get exempted from the fentanyl-related tariffs, they'd still face a minimum 10% tariff under Trump's broader system.
Are other U.S. allies frustrated with trade talks?
Yes, there's growing frustration. Japan is reportedly using its holding of U.S. debt as leverage. The EU is making little progress. The U.K. is hinting it might get better results dealing with Europe. The tariffs are also starting to bite U.S. businesses and consumers' reports of empty Chinese cargo ships and docks.
Is Carney well-suited for this?
As a veteran of global economic crises from his central banking days, he might be uniquely placed. Markets haven't seemed impressed with the White House's economic advisors lately.
Did Carney win a majority?
No, he missed a parliamentary majority. He's trying to project this as a virtue, saying he'll seek a Team Canada approach for the talks with the U.S.
Are there internal Canadian challenges?
Yes. The Premier of oil-rich Alberta, who is a regular visitor to Mar-a-Lago, announced moves to make provincial separation referendums easier, adding another layer of complexity. Carney faces a complex situation domestically, continentally, and globally. He could end up playing a significant role beyond Canada's borders.
And finally, a story about Buddhist relics and an ethical debate.
Yes, a cache of jewels linked to the historical Buddha's remains unearthed in India back in 1898 is set to be auctioned at Sotheby's in Hong Kong. This has sparked quite a debate.
What kind of jewels are we talking about?
Nearly 1,800 items, pearls, rubies, topaz, sapphires, gold sheets. They were found in a brick chamber near Lumbini, the Buddha's traditional birthplace.
Were they found with actual relics?
Yes, alongside bone fragments identified at the time as relics of the Buddha himself. Nicholas Chow from Sotheby's called it among the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries of all time.
What's the ethical concern?
Experts are questioning whether it's ethical to sell treasures so closely tied to India's sacred past and the origins of Buddhism.
Who did the original excavation?
An English estate manager named William Claxton Pepe back in 1898 on his land at Pipara near Lumbini.
What's the historical view of these relics?
Historians say the relics are the heritage of the Buddhist Sakya clan and Buddhists worldwide. The bone relics discovered were actually distributed to Thailand, Sri Lanka, Myanmar for veneration.
So, should they be sold?
Art historian Namana Huja posed key questions. Are the relics of the Buddha a commodity?
Mm.
How is the seller ethically authorized to auction them? Custodian on whose behalf? Does custodianship permit them now to sell these relics?
Who is selling them?
Chris Pepe, the great-grandson of the excavator. He said the family considered donating them but found problems with the options available and decided an auction was the fairest and most transparent way to transfer these relics to Buddhists.
What does Sotheby's say?
Julian King from Sotheby's stated they conducted a thorough review, including due diligence on authenticity, provenance, and legality, in line with their policies.
Are the gems considered part of the human remains?
That's a point of contention. Academics like Ashley Thompson and Conan Cheong raised ethical questions about trading human remains and who decides what constitutes them. They argue, for many Buddhist practitioners, the gems on sale are part and parcel of the bones and ash.
Have Buddhist leaders commented?
Yes, expressing concern. Amal Abeyewardene from the British Mahabodhi Society referenced Buddhist teachings against taking possessions without permission and stated historical records indicate the Sakyamuni clan were custodians, wishing for the relics and adornments to be preserved together for veneration in perpetuity.
How did the family end up with the jewels?
Chris Pepe explained they passed down through the family. He and two cousins inherited them in 2013. He researched the discovery, finding original 1898 newspaper reports.
What was the motivation for the original dig?
He mentioned his great-grandfather, William Pepe, undertook the excavation partly to provide work for tenant farmers during a famine. He was also a trained engineer.
What happened to the items originally found?
William Pepe gave the bone relics, 5 relic urns, the stone chest they were in, and most of the other items to the colonial Indian government. The bone relics went to the King of Siam, now Thailand, and the rest to the Indian Museum in Kolkata. He kept what was described as a small portion of duplicates, roughly 1/5 of the discovery.
And Sotheby's considers these duplicates legitimate to sell.
They framed them as original surplus items that the Indian government permitted the Pepe family to retain at the time. However, some scholars maintain that anything considered a Buddha relic should simply never be treated as a market commodity, a complex intersection of history, religion, and commerce.
Indeed. Well, from conflicts in Syria and Gaza, political shifts in Canada and Romania, to the reopening of Alcatraz and this debate over ancient relics, it's been a packed news cycle. That auction story really does make you think about history, faith, and the marketplace. Lots of global challenges and transformations happening right now. Thanks for joining us for this daily news update.